Hello friends, it's nice to see you back on the Car Lover channel. Today we have an unusual episode. Instead of admiring the legends of the auto industry, we will talk about a complete failure. Yes, even giants like Ford sometimes release absolutely terrible cars. These are the cars that disappointed their owners, broke down more often than they ran, and looked like they were assembled with their eyes closed. Some of them were unsafe, others were horribly ugly, and some of them you may not have even heard of, and for good reason. Get comfortable because now we are going to look at 10 of the most disgusting and unsuccessful Ford cars. Are you ready? Let's go! Number 10. 1993 Ford Festiva, which was produced until 1993. If you thought it couldn't get any worse, it's clearly not about this one. Although it bears the name Festiva, it is actually a reworked Mazda car, manufactured by Ford, but assembled in South Korea by Kia and sold in our country until 1993. Ford positioned it as the cheapest car in the line, but the quality left much to be desired. What was so bad? Slow engine, only 58 to 63 horsepower, with a mass of about 770 kilograms. The car literally barely accelerated, especially when merging with the highway. Very cheap interior and assembly. Thin panels, hard seats, lack of sound insulation made the ride unpleasant. Electronic seatbelts constantly jammed, electrics failed. Reliability issues. Complaints about difficulties with starting due to the fuel pump, corrosion of the cooling system, water leakage through the air intake, a discharged battery, and frequent downtime on the road. The safety rating, according to the Monash University study, showed only 2 out of 5 stars, worse than average in its segment. The car was sold in large quantities, about 350,000 units in the US, despite weak reviews. This speaks more to the low price than to the quality. Why it deserved a place on the worst list. The Festiva was called the most boring car festival created by Ford. It seems to have a car, but it is not clear why. Even on Reddit forums, experienced owners admitted, "I will not drive it on the highway, like motorcycles without protection, or the dashboard bends if you sit on the hood." In the end, the Ford Festiva 1993 is an example of when Ford tried to enter the market cheaply and as a result received a product that was not distinguished by reliability, comfort, or safety. And if you are thinking of buying the cheapest Ford, think twice. It is better to invest a little more and get a car that you are not ashamed to drive. Number 9. 1979 Ford Fairmont, when normal became synonymous with disgusting. Okay friends, let's be honest. The 1979 Ford Fairmont is not just a boring sedan from the late 70s. This is the car that became the personification of everything that was wrong with the credibility of the auto industry in our century. On paper, everything looked fine. The Fairmont was supposed to be a new hope for Ford. Lighter, more economical, fresh design, the Fox platform, which would later be used for the Mustang and other models. But here's the problem. The replacement was a car that did nothing well. Let's take it in order. Under the hood, in search of a version, a 2.3-liter 4-cylinder engine with a power of just over 85 HP. Imagine, the weight is almost 1.5 tons, and this engine barely pulls. Acceleration to 100 kilometers more than 15 seconds. And all this with constant vibration, jerking, and a nasty sound of the engine. Many then said, "You'll fall asleep at the wheel rather than get home." Of course, you could choose the optional V6 or even V8, but you bought the Fairmont not for speed, but for economy. And here's the bottom line. No speed, no economy, no driving pleasure. The interior is made of the cheapest plastics. The dashboard is as if taken from a toy set. Everything rattles, the doors close with an empty sound of a tin can. Even the seats, seemingly normal at first glance, are hard, uncomfortable, quickly sag. There is almost no noise reduction. Driving on the highway and you hear everything: the wind, the noise of the tires, the vibration of the body. Plus the constant problems: door handles falling off, broken windows, an overheating alternator, and even a short-circuiting dashboard. And yes, Ford bragged that it was the universal platform of the future. But in 1979, it looked more like an unfinished project than a technological advance. By the way, what do the owners think? One guy on Reddit described his car as the saddest vehicle I've ever driven. Another recalled how the window simply fell out of the door during the rain and the rear end started humming after 60,000 miles. These aren't isolated cases. This was a typical Fairmont. Yes, the Fairmont sells, and quite well. Over 400,000 in the first year alone. But you know why? It was excellent. It was something that was taken on an absentee principle. Well, okay, let it be, as long as it drives. But the problem was that it drove badly, and it broke down, and it had no personality. It wasn't terrible like, say, a Ford Pinto, but it was whatever. Nothing is worse than bad, because a car is memorable. The 1979 Fairmont is when Ford said, "This will do," and it went down in history as one of the most bland, boring, clunky, and poorly put together cars ever to roll off the brand's assembly line. Let's move on to another classic of failures. Number 8. Ford Granada 1975. If Fairmont was boring and monotonous, then Granada is literally drowning in cliched attempts to look premium while regularly breaking down and slowly washing away from the record. What kind of car was that? In 1975, Ford introduced Granada, positioned as a more elite alternative to Maverick and Torino, seemingly compact but with a hint of premium level. The car was built on the basis of the Falcon platform, air conditioner, but at the same time tried to give it a European style, comparable to Mercedes, especially in the advertising campaign. From the very beginning, Granada gained a reputation as a top seller in terms of price, but did not promise the quality and reliability of the name. Main problems and shortcomings: weak dynamics and guaranteed performance. The base engine is a 6-cylinder Pinto 2.0 to 2.3 liters, maximum around 100 to 110 horsepower. The V6 3.0 to 3.3 liters had up to 137 horsepower, but this was clearly not enough. The car is heavy and slow. Acceleration to 100 kilometers per hour more than 13 to 14 seconds. Driving on the highway turned into torture at a speed above 80 miles per hour. It has a weak suspension and handling. At high speeds, the Granada was unstable. Rocking, noise from the front suspension, weak sharpness, just typical symptoms of the malaise of the era. The side joints of the suspension caused cracks and knocks already at a mileage of several decades of thousands. Body corrosion. The metal is thin, especially the thresholds, arches, trunk. Rust appeared quickly even with minimal contact with moisture. Reddit owners accidentally, Granada, literally fell apart before our eyes. People joke that it would be better if it returned to Earth. Poor build quality and finish. The interior trim, plush seats mixed with cheap chrome, looked cute but rattled and quickly wore out. Weak electrical. Wiring corroded, panels were loose, instrument lighting, everything broke from the beginning. Typical complaints from owners. Reddit. They were too rusty. Drove cross-country to the west, pulled a U-Haul, and couldn't accelerate above 45 miles per hour. Irony about overheating and a weak engine. Officially the most unpleasant car ever made. The car that basically destroyed Detroit. The name of the liquid sick of the 70s. Why Granada was on the list of cores. In the old picture, expensive plastic, good advertising slogans, but no merits. It is a typical example of the era of malaise, an attempt to pack a prestigious message into cheap filling. It sold well, more than 400,000 in the first year alone, but demand was for price, not quality. And after a couple of years, the model began to cut sales. So friends, the 1975 Ford Granada is the perfect definition of words. Comfortable only in the cabin until the first sounds. The promise of European premium turns into a cheap plastic box. Rusting, broken, and absolutely without charisma. If you ever wondered what the dull and unreliable legacy of Ford looks like, this is the Granada. Best idea, go around the side. Number 7. 1958 Ford Fairlane 500 Skyliner. Luxury turned into a headache. If you think that unreliable electronics are a thing in the 2000s, let me introduce you to the 1958 Ford Fairlane 500 Skyliner. It's a convertible with a roof that folds itself. Yes, electromechanics, buttons, motors, straight out of the late 50s. And it sounds like, wow, until you try to put the roof up in the rain and it suddenly jams. What kind of car was it? The Skyliner is a premium version of the Fairlane 500 with one main feature, a hard metal roof that automatically folds into the trunk. An innovation for the late 1950s. It looked cool, was advertised as a miracle of technology. At first, the car caused a furor, but after a couple of years, it called the very essence of an overcomplicated machine transmission. What was the problem? 1. Complex and fragile roof structure. The roof consists of 7 electric motors, 10 solenoids, and 600 feet of wires. The system often failed, especially when the battery charge was low or there were minor electrical problems. In an emergency, rain, wind, roof, you could simply leave it open. The owners joked, "I have more confidence in an alarm clock than in this roof." 2. Weight and handling. At this stage, the car was built with a heavy weight, almost 4,000 pounds, 1,800 plus kilograms. Due to the weight and the shifted center of gravity, handling was terrible, especially in turns. Even by the standards of the late 50s, the Fairlane Skyliner was a heavy and reluctant ride. 3. Terrible trunk. When the roof was folded, the trunk completely disappeared. There was no room even for a suitcase. Imagine a family trip and literally nowhere to put things. And you can't even sacrifice the roof because it may not open back up. 4. Build quality and corrosion. Despite the premium positioning, the metal and panels rusted quite quickly, especially in the northern states. The paintwork was weak, the rubber seals in the lid quickly cracked. Why is this one of the cheapest Ford cars? The idea was impressive, the implementation was catastrophic. The roof requires constant maintenance, adjustments, and replacement of parts that are hard to find even in the 60s. The cost was high and the problems were widespread. Sales plummeted in 1959 and Ford scrapped the Skyliner, admitting it had made a costly mistake. Real reviews. One owner wrote on a recent car forum, "I liked the idea, but after the 3rd time I had to manually raise the roof back, I realized it wasn't worth the headache." Mechanics recalled the Skyliner as a nightmare in the shop. To this day, enthusiasts collect their exteriors, but almost all the roof holders are permanently closed. So, if you think a Tesla with touch buttons is too much, remember the 1958 Ford Skyliner. Where others were making simple convertibles, Ford decided to surprise the world, and surprised. The car became an icon, not because it was good, but because it was the first to show how not to complicate simple things. If you like failure, the Skyliner will not disappoint you. Number 6. 1976 Ford Elite. Think of it as a premium version of a basic Torino, and this is where Ford made its iconic marketing fail. A little history. The Ford Elite was produced from 1974 to 1976. The first cars were called Gran Torino Elite, and in the early years, just Elite. It was an attempt to compete with the Chevrolet Monte Carlo and Pontiac Grand Prix, personal coupes with a percentage of glamour and luxury. But instead, it turned out to be a renamed Mercury Cougar XR7 in plastic wrap, nothing more. Main problems. 1. Price for gamer style, low quality. Huge size, 18-foot coupe, weight about 6,000 pounds, together with soft suspension made for a stiff, cottony car without drive. The engines, 351 Windsor, 400, even 460 V8, might have been more powerful on paper, but the fuel economy and performance left much to be desired. Acceleration to 60 mph took about 13 to 14 seconds, about the same as the MPG. 2. Exterior glamour, interior. The interior has plush seats with decorative inserts and cushions stuck on them to make the visual perception seem premium without real quality. Lots of plastic parts. Panels are loose. Handling is like a boat on the road. Poor connection to the road, poor visibility, poor ceiling. 3. Unreliability and privacy of the platform. The Elite was built on the proven Torino platform, but without improvements. Ford simply decorated it in the kitchen, and here you have a personal coupe with an empty interior. Owners complained. Boiling radiators, dead batteries, leaking vacuum hoses, and ignition failure. Owner quotes, "Almost every rubber part failed. Tires rotted, hoses, belts, and vacuum lines burned out. Spend a few thousand on repairs and you'll still end up with a Torino sled." Club Talk Forum on restoration. Car Talk community. This Elite is the top-of-the-line Torino, but it rides like a barge. It's gas-guzzling, heavy, and soulless. Reddit user on RideFeel. Why the Elite is one of the coolest Fords. Idea: a personal luxury coupe. Reality: heavy, clunky, uncomfortable, and unreliable, with no uniqueness. This Elite is a typical character from the Malaise era, when Ford invested heavily in engineering but offered a glamorous image. Despite selling about 366,000 cars in 3 years, the quality expectations were not met. This was product marketing, not engineering. So, the 1966 Ford Elite is like a cheap plastic mask. It looks decent, but unexpectedly disappoints. You can't trust this car without thinking about the joy of driving, and you get no pleasure from its appearance or its speakers. Number 5. 1949 Ford Anglia, code E494A. And if you thought that deeper cars were loud, modern failures, believe us, England can definitely take a place on our list. Model history. Anglia E494A is a restyling of the pre-war model, released in 1949. At that time, it was the cheapest four-wheeled car in the UK. It cost only £309 sterling with taxes. Manufactured until 1953, a total of about 108,878 units were made. It was also produced in Australia under the code A494A and sold as the most basic family car. Main problems: why England got into our top worse than Ford. 1. Horribly slow acceleration and weak dynamics. It was equipped with a tiny 1172cc engine with a capacity of only 10 horsepower. Acceleration from 0 to some 50 miles per hour took a whopping 38 seconds. Top speed was about 57 miles per hour, 92 kilometers. Imagine starting off and thinking, at least the radio works. 2. Terrible ride stability. The suspension is too hard and the wheels are tiny 13-inch. The car jerked over bumps, the rear axle buzzed under adjustment. The steering is dull. The gears take a long time to change, especially the reverse gear could accidentally click. 3. About corrosion and assembly, almost the word nightmare. The metal is thin. Thresholds, arches, bottom, they rot quickly. Rust set in after just 1 season, even with minimal humidity. Instrument trim, cold panels, simplified plastic. 6-volt electrics often failed. Even the original seals and rubber bands caused stains and dampness inside the cabin. 4. Driving experience and owner reviews. My grandfather restored one. It was charming, but painfully slow and noisy. Reddit user Family England. They rusted a lot. Owner reviews of the flimsy body structure. Why England ended up on the list of the cheapest Fords. Let's start with simple mechanics. No boosters, no synchronized clutch in first gear. Brakes, cable drums front and rear. No vacuum. It was a celebration of the cheap car industry, without a hint of comfort and safety. It would have been faster to take a horse and cart. England sold at a price, but operation turned into a test. This is not a bad car, it is just a car that should not be. In the end, the Ford Anglia E494A is not a screaming disaster of the Pinto, but it is a quiet epidemic of boredom, slow, rattling, rusting, and absolutely without charisma. Ford created it as a cheap family car, and that is exactly what it remained. But during its existence, it earned the status of one of the most faceless and unsuitable cars in the history of the brand. Number 4. 195 Ford Mainline, a humble start and a deep disappointment. If you think cheaper cars are the ones that break down or explode, think again. Some cars just weren't meant to be. The 1955 Ford Mainline, for example, was a total anti-revolutionary for its time. A little context. The Mainline was Ford's entry-level full-size sedan from 1952 to 1956. It found itself in an awkward position in 1955. It was the year Ford dramatically updated its design to compete with the Chevrolet Bel Air, but the Mainline got almost none of that wow factor. While the Fairlane was the ship of the future, the Custom line at least had some chrome. The Mainline looked poor, aging, and dull. The 1955 Mainline was a flop. 1. Boring styling and no style. Visually, the Mainline was as boring as it gets. Minimum chrome, standard stamped bumpers, no or very basic wheel covers. No side moldings, no two-tone paint. It was simply unnoticed on the road, not in a good way. The Mainline was like bread without crust. But you don't remember. 2. The poorest trim level. Inside, no radio, no carpets, not even a clock or ashtray. Manual windows, hard vinyl seat covers, and virtually zero sound insulation. The interior was Spartan even by the standards of the 1950s. People bought such cars only because of the price and often regretted it. 3. Specifications. The Mainline is offered with an inline-6 with 120 horsepower and a V8 with 162 horsepower. Sounds normal, but the mechanics were wooden. A 3-speed tulip gearbox, no brakes, drum, and weak. The suspension with long springs made the ride hard and boomy. The steering, without power steering, very tight in the parking lot, uninformative on the highway. 4. Terrible wear and corrosion. The metal is thin. The paint is unstable. These cars began to rot after 4 to 5 years of operation. The owners regretted that rust appears even on new cars in wet weather. Even when the Mainline was a cheap regulation, it was quickly transferred to trade-in. No one wanted to keep it for long. Why the Mainline is a cheap thing that gave itself away? This is not a horror in the style of Pinto or Edsel. This is a quiet failure. A car I built with the idea of, let there be something, and that's exactly what it felt like. Compared to the Chevy or Plymouth competition in 1955, the Mainline looked like a 1950 car. Ford wanted to give the buyer a choice, but the car he created was embarrassing to park in your driveway. The Mainline never made anyone proud. It just was there. Comment from former owner. Hemmings. The 1955 Ford Mainline is a reminder that this is not a budget car worth simplifying. Saving money can sometimes hurt a reputation. And this car wasn't bad because it was broken. It was bad because it had nothing. No style, no fun, no future.
Number 3. The 1973 Ford Ranchero 500. And no, it's not necessarily a positive world. It looks good in pictures, sounds powerful on paper, but in reality, it's a car that often ends its life in a garage, under a layer of dust and neglect. Contextual models. The Ranchero 500 is a mid-size pickup truck built on the Torino platform, with a rich interior trim, a touch of luxury, vinyl seats, carpeting, and even an electric clock on some trim levels. 1973 was the peak of the sixth generation, 1972 to 1976 model, but many aspects were taken into account in order to comply with new regulations. The cars became heavier and less dynamic. The main problems: why the Ranchero 500 is one of Ford's failures. 1. Unattractive reliability and difficult operation. Owners often encountered difficult starting of the engine, especially with a bad filter or problems with the fuel supply. According to HowTune, based on owner reviews, the main problems are the starter, idle stability, error. Gear indicator, problems with the heater and defroster. 2nd, frame corrosion and repairability. Rust. This year, the bed, trunk floors, and day beds of the truck are poorly protected and quickly catch fire due to constant drainage. Reddit forums confirm every time someone finds a 73 Ranchero with a low price, most likely the hand of a local body shop has already been there, covered in putty and bolts. 3. Expensive parts and rarity of spare parts. Reddit users warn that 1983 to 84 El Caminos are cheaper and easier to repair, while Ranchero parts are nearly impossible to find, especially for the 73 model. 4th, weak handling and outdated mechanics. Ranchero 500 models were paired with engines ranging from the 250 i6, 92 horsepower, 302 V8, approximately 137 horsepower, and 351 V8, approximately 159 horsepower, but with a low degree of reduction in the introduction of modifications to the standards, rather than a noticeable drive. Transmission, either a 3-speed automatic or a manual top loader before 1973. Many complained about rough clutch action, failure of first and reverse gears. Quotes from Reddit: 1973 will be the worst year to buy a Ranchero. Parts for this generation will also be harder to get than for previous generations. Anantech forums.anantech.com. Engine wouldn't start. Wiring was improperly connected. Exposed wires caught fire. Paint was peeling. Water in the cabin. Restamod owner who received a Ranchero 500 in terrible condition. $3,800 is way too much. Parts for everything, but the mechanicals are almost non-existent. From ERR Classic Cars, reviewing a Ranchero GT, but applicable to the 500 as well. Why the Ranchero 500 made the core list. This wasn't just a car with problems. It was a medium-heavy vehicle that required more money and more time to restore than was offered. Ford marketed it as a stylish pickup coupe, but it was a different role. A truck without a truck, a coupe without the comfort and driving displeasure. Problems with corrosion, wiring, ride quality, and unavailability of parts made the project a pain, even if the price seemed extra. So if you ever load up a 1973 Ranchero 500 on your classic search, consider it an accident. This isn't a blast to drive or an icon. This is a car Ford had ambition for but didn't deliver on. Not for the faint of heart, and definitely not for the long haul. Number 2. 1961 Ford Falcon. This is the very legend of the compact Ford of the early 60s, which was advertised as an economical, simple, and practical car. But the reality was different. History and positioning. The first-generation Falcon, 1960 to 63, was designed as a cheap and simple alternative to the big Ford sedan, with compact dimensions and moderate fuel consumption, up to 30 miles per gallon, approximately 7.8 liters per 100 kilometers on the highway, which was outstanding for those years. Base price in 1961, about $1,912 for a two-door sedan, and up to $2,287 for a station wagon, making the Falcon cheaper in most cases. Sales soared to 435,000 units in the first year. Ford achieved record model launches. The main problems. Why the Falcon ended up on the loaded list. Weak dynamics base engine, 2.4-liter, inline i6. Power only 65 to 67 horsepower. Even with the option of a 2.8-liter Special 6, approximately 101 horsepower, the car accelerated to 60 miles per hour in just 14.3 seconds, which is unsatisfactory even by 1961 standards. On the highway, the Falcon lost direction and constantly barely maintained speed. Reliability and maintainability owners complained about frequent failures of the fuel system. Fuel pumps, clogged filters, gas pipes rotted and let air through, interfering with the movement of the engine. There are also problems with bearings, forged shafts and valves, especially when driving more than 60 to 70,000 miles. It is often at this mileage that the Falcon requires an engine overhaul. Suspension and steering. The first XK model had problems with ball joints, which broke on bad roads. The steering racks are loose. In the center of the steering wheel, there is a gaping area without feedback, as described by the owner on the forums. Falcon, with solid body and cover metals affected by sudden rust on the sills, in the daytime, in the arches. On cars from the Midwest and northern states, rust began after 2 to 3 years, even with regular washing and waxing. Real owner reviews. The front ball joints began to break after a few months. The suspension could barely withstand driving on dirt roads. After 70,000 miles, the engine needed a rebuild. Bearings shot out, dirt everywhere. Car Talk forum user about the 1961 Falcon: fuel leaks, carburetor problems, slow acceleration, fun to operate, but a pain to drive. Reddit quote about Falcons of the era. Why this Falcon is popular on the worse than Ford list. It wasn't a car that crashed or was ugly. It was a boring and unreliable car that pushed owners to repair it. Its strength, simplicity, turned out to be a weakness. Provide power, plastic, no comfort, bad speakers. Ford wanted to give the compact sedan market, but in the end, the 1961 Falcon became a symbol of simplified engineering, unreliability, and innovation. In the end, the base 1961 Ford Falcon sedan is an era of cars that is remembered not for its comfort, but for its constant problems. Rusty, backward, and with a poorly thought-out design. This is not the Falcon that people were proud of. Soon, the one that was taken to the top of the most boring and unreliable Ford cars. Number 1. 1960 Ford Thunderbird. Yes, the legendary Bird Thunder, the second generation. Perhaps it evokes nostalgia in someone, but in fact it is one of the most controversial and problematic Ford cars of its time. Don't believe me? Now let's talk about everything in order. Model history. Change of course. The first-generation Thunderbird, 1955 to 1957, was a two-seat sports coupe, created as a response to the Chevy Corvette. But since 1958, Ford changed the look. The Thunderbird became a four-seat, heavy, with an emphasis on comfort, not drive. 1960 was the final year in the Square Bird series, second generation. The styling is angular, massive, with chrome, an extended grille, and a massive rear. It was a commercial success. Ford sold 92,843 in 1960, making the Thunderbird one of the best-selling luxury models in the United States. Why is it one of the worst Fords? Overweight and lazy on the road. The car weighed almost 4,000 pounds, approximately 1,800 kilograms. Too much for coupe. The base engine is a 352 cubic inch V8, 5.8 liters, 300 horsepower, but due to its weight, it did not provide sportiness, but rather a slow, blurry ride. Real-world tests of manifestation accelerate to 60 miles per hour in approximately 11.5 seconds, while the control remains white. Strong roll, insensitive steering, almost zero connection with the road. Build quality and reliability. The Thunderbird was often criticized for poor quality of finish. Chrome quickly faded, rubber leaked, doors began to creak and sag over time. The owner on the Ford Muscle Forum writes, "My 1960 T-Bird is more of a floating barn than a used coupe." The doors closed from the impact. The electrics lived their own lives. Special complaints were about the electric seats and windows. They often broke, and the part was difficult to replace even in the 70s. Maintenance, expensive and inconvenient. Due to the complex design of the interior and the overload of options, repairs were even expensive back then. Some elements, especially suspension and interior parts, were unique to this model, which makes restoration very expensive even today. Why even Ford fans criticize it. It was a trick car. It looked like a luxury muscle car, but did not drive like a muscle car and did not feel like a luxury car. The lack of sportiness disappointed those who remembered the Thunderbird as a competitor to the Corvette. The transition to a heavier and toothless formula made the car a barge for pensioners and not a dream of youth, as it was originally positioned. Reviews. The 1960 Thunderbird looks cool until it goes. Too heavy, truck steering, watt brakes. I had one. I bought it for the looks, but it was tiresome to drive. The road doesn't hold, the maneuverability is terrible. I sold it without regrets. Reddit comment. Bottom line, a big name, but weak implementation. The 1960 Ford Thunderbird became a symbol of the fact that a current automotive legend can be made into a heavy, sluggish, and problematic car. Yes, it's beautiful. Yes, it's retro. But in fact, it's one of the most overrated Ford models, which in practice turns out to be uncomfortable, unreliable, and far from a dream on wheels.